So I referred before to Marion Waite being very early at the Buller Goldfields. She was born Marion Waller in Chelsea in London in 1825 and was the daughter of a servant, and James, and his wife Harriet. She had an older brother and sister and a younger brother, Alfred. And in 1840, disaster struck the family when Marion's younger brother Alfred, who had fallen in with a rough crowd, was convicted of stealing a wheelbarrow worth 2 shillings and sentenced to 7 years transportation to Australia. And he was 12 years old at the time. By February 1852, Marion was in Melbourne, and she used newspaper advertisements to try and find her brother, and I don't know that she ever did. In mid-1853, Marion married stonecutter Reuben Waite in South Melbourne. Marion would later say that she'd had 8 offers of marriage in 1 week, and that she only married Reuben to spite a man that she had been engaged to, but then she'd found out that he was already married. After their marriage, the pair headed to the goldfields, and life was not without its adventures. Marion was the subject of an unsuccessful sticking up near Ballarat, and the victim was scared off by approaching travellers, but apparently Marion had exhibited great presence of mind. In 1858, the Waites had a store at the Armstrong diggings in Victoria, and it was Marion who gave evidence when a man was charged with stealing money from the till. Marion was clearly in charge of the shop. Reuben was there, but he was not called to give evidence. By late 1859, the couple had come to New Zealand and were on the Aurora goldfields in the Nelson district, living at Moonlight Flat on Slate River. And it's very tempting to think that it was Marion that a digger named Moffat, who had arrived there in late 1860, met Marion and her husband at the store. He talks about this husband and wife. The wife, rather middle-aged, evidently had the goodwill of all the diggers. Her advice appeared to be taken on every conceivable question. She informed us that Bill and Jim, in her opinion, were losing half their gold by having too much pitch on their sluice boxes and too big a head of water, and that Joe was just wasting his time washing dirt with a cradle, and that he could, if he were not so lazy, bring in a sluice head of water in about 3 days and get lots of gold. We were strongly advised by her to go and set into Manrope Gully, and that if we wanted to start, we could have tools and tucker on the long time. In April 1861, Marion was caught out by a flood that submerged Moonlight Flat and was rescued by a digger who swam out and brought her to safety. And it's not clear exactly when Marion went to Buller River, but she probably went with Reuben on the Jane, which arrived there in June 1861. Evidently, Marion had the confidence of Nelson's superintendent, who instructed Thomas Brunner, sent down to survey the harbour and mark off sections in early 1862, to leave the plan with Mrs. Waite. It was the superintendent that Marion wrote to asking for supplies to be sent immediately when provisions at Buller River had become dangerously low. The Waites moved from Buller River to the Grey River in 1864, and again they were crucially involved with the development of the new town. And Marion's 2 nephews, the sons of her older brother, joined the Waites on the west coast at about this time. And in 1870, the Waites became interested in the Karamea district, and they set up a store there because there was a small number of miners. And Reuben, this is where it all kind of started to go wrong really, Reuben purchased a ketch, which was called the Amateur, and he renamed it the Pioneer. But unfortunately it was wrecked quite soon afterwards, just north of the Karamea River, and the Waites lost a lot of money. While they were there, Marion became very unwell, and because Reuben was busy salvaging the vessel, or trying to, she was left there on her own for about 3 weeks before she was collected from her solitary abode. And after, they never seemed to have financially recovered from the loss of the Pioneer, and they subsequently lived at Lisle, and by 1877 had a hotel at Anungahua Junction. In 1883, traveller Mary Menzies, who stopped at the Waites public house at Anungahua Junction, described Marion as a very sensible, superior old woman, but wrote that Reuben was a horrid, greasy-looking, conceited old man who bullied his wife. Reuben died at Nelson Hospital a couple of years later, and the hotel was advertised for sale. Marion moved to Westport and stayed with a friend and her husband. She had no income and had to write to the Charitable Aid Board and ask if the £1 that was being given to her husband as charitable aid could be granted to her, and that was approved. Marion died at Westport in October 1894, her death seemingly unnoticed. She left a small estate of £10 to her nephew Alfred Waller.